Okay, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us in the first of our series on protecting your intellectual property with FBI Special Agents Jordan Lloyd and Jill Murphy. My name is Zach Walker. I'm the Texas lead for the Defense Innovation Unit, a Department of Defense organization that connects commercial technology to the most challenging Department of Defense problems. And of course, a big part of that is protecting intellectual property of the startups and other companies that we work with, which is why it's such a huge honor to have two special agents with us today to talk about that. Before we get started, I want to make sure that everyone knows to ask questions, use the Slido app, either sli.do in the App Store or just on the website, sli.do. And you can ask your questions directly. The hashtag is DIU. And with that, turn it over to Agent Lloyd to get us started.
Thanks, Zach. Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Lloyd. I'm a supervisory special agent with the FBI here in Austin, Texas, and I manage the computer intrusion program here in Central Texas, which spans 13 counties. Prior to that, I was at headquarters where we managed cyber operations, and then worked about 6 years in New York City and a couple years in the state of Iowa.
Hi everyone, my name is Jill Murphy, and I want to first and foremost apologize if we use acronyms that you don't know. If we do, just send us a note in Slido and we will put the correct language out.
Explain acronyms, yeah.
We are acronym heavy. So when Jordan says he was at headquarters, it means he was in Washington, D.C. at our headquarters office, which is where I was also before coming to Austin, Texas a few years ago. And I work counterintelligence matters. And I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on what that is. So counterintelligence, a lot of people think of it as spycraft. So if you watch The Americans, that's actually based on a true story. So that's kind of in line with what we do when we work counterintelligence cases. The other thing that we worry about, and especially worry about here in Austin, is intellectual property and the protection thereof. So one of the things that we've been really stressing in Austin and other places across the FBI is doing outreach to people that work in emerging tech. And Zach and everyone here at Capital Factory work in that ecosystem. So we wanted to do this event to do a little bit further outreach to people who maybe can't make it to Capital Factory for an event and talk about the protection of intellectual property. Most people probably know this, but the United States is the greatest producer of intellectual property in the world. According to a 2017 World Economic Forum report, Austin is the 7th most dynamic city in the world due to its innovation and technology. So there's a ton of people out there that are doing innovative stuff and creating innovative things, and we want to make sure that those people are protecting their intellectual property. And from the FBI's perspective, I'd say there's probably 3 threat vectors, we call them threat vectors, that we see that look at the theft of intellectual property or stealing intellectual property. One is insiders, people inside your company. There's a great propensity of people that when they leave businesses, take intellectual property with them. That could be witting or unwitting. There's also insiders that leave your business and maybe go to work for a competitor. Competitors may also steal your intellectual property, and nation states may steal your intellectual property. So those are probably the 3 big areas that we focus on at the FBI and looking at theft and protection of intellectual property.
That's a great question. So insiders, corporates, and nation states are the 3 big ones to watch out for.
Competitors, yeah.
Competitors.
Yeah, so I mean, if you imagine in Austin, for instance, or in Silicon Valley, or anywhere else in the United States that has a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, it could be in Iowa. You know, we could be at a coffee shop, and we could have some great idea. We could be scribbling it down on a napkin. The question becomes, is that my intellectual property or your intellectual property, right? And so we might start to build a business, and we might start to talk to people, and we might be great friends today. You might work for a competitor tomorrow, right? Who owns that intellectual property? And I just think it's something entrepreneurs don't think about as much as we think about in the protection of the stuff that they're trying to build.
Yeah. So what are some tips for how startups can protect that? And then at what point does it make sense to call law enforcement?
So that's a great question. So startups should probably think about that as they're actually starting up, about protecting. Like, what is your secret sauce and what is it that you need to protect? That if you lose, your business would no longer exist. So I think that there's probably a progression of things that you would do as a startup, because you can't spend all your capital, to patent something. You've got to work towards certain milestones. But I think understanding identifying what your secret sauce is and protecting that, whether it is in the cyberspace, right? If you're, is it encrypted? Is it encrypted in rest? Are you emailing it? Does everyone have access to it? If it's hard copy, do you lock it in a drawer at night? Do you lock it in a safe? Who has access to that information, and how are you controlling access to that information? I think there's simple ways to do it. We have tons of resources on the FBI.gov website. Also on IPRcenter.org has a website. National Counterintelligence and Security Center has a website. There's tons of free resources to help people figure out what to do.
Makes sense. So, Agent Lloyd, so specifically cybersecurity, everyone wonders, everyone has open Wi-Fi, everyone has pretty much personal laptops. What is the risk, and what are some technical measures that people can take to protect those crown jewels of IP?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, thanks. So, basically, what I see is that, especially the companies here in Central Texas, they face a lot of third-party risk exposure whenever they're working with outside contractors who are, performing some specialized service to grow the business, the overall business. A lot of times, we'll see computer intrusion into that third party, and then we'll see the attacker pivot into the clients of the third party. And a lot of times that's in a startup or small business, that can impact the small business significantly, because maybe they haven't grown their security posture with their company, right? As their company scales up, the security might lag behind, and then it just causes a little bit of a risk exposure. I would say, one thing we see that time and time again, computer intrusions occur, and the companies don't necessarily know exactly where their intellectual property is located on their network. You ask them, what's important and where is it located, and the companies can't exactly answer that question. They don't always go through the process of assessing the data that's in their network and where their knowledge is stored, and then they don't necessarily implement access control based upon how important, how risky the data is if it were to be stolen.
That's great. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for audience questions, and I think we'll be able to get a lot more of this info teased out as we go. The first one's easy. I'll take this. Will there be a recording of the webinar? So everyone that's watching today, which again, thank you for watching, it is on this YouTube link. This link will stay the same after the event, and it'll stay just forever for the the interwebs. So in 20 years, we can look back and remember how good we looked. So it will be recorded. Okay. This one actually goes back to what you were saying a minute ago. How do we keep our IP safe in a co-working space or on open Wi-Fi?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's a lot of risk acceptance to doing business, right? Whatever the environment is that you're working in, there's a little bit of risk acceptance that comes along the way with that environment. So, when you're working in a co-working space or open Wi-Fi, things of that nature, if you're just inherently trusting the network connection, be it at a co-working space or an airport, it's really the same basic risk in that other individuals on that network could exploit your device. You're sitting local next to all the other, it's pretty common in these co-working spaces for you to be sitting local on a flat network where other individuals who are on the same network can exploit your device and steal what's on it. So you want to think about ideas like is it a better strategy to tunnel out to your own exit point going out to the internet, or do you want to consider encrypting your data and maybe not necessarily storing your data in an internet connected device if you're going to work out of a space that's being used by others. So think that's kind of the basic concepts around that. But we try to encourage people to just kind of minimize their presence on open networks and secure their devices when they're on there, and then understand the risks that they're exposing themselves to whenever they choose to use stuff like public Wi-Fi, because everybody needs it on occasion, or most people do. We understand that. We just want people to minimize their risk when they're engaging in such activity.
That makes sense, definitely. So, Agent Murphy, I think this one may be good for you. What do we do if we think someone has accessed our IP without our permission? And didn't specify if we think it was nation-state competitor insider threat. But there's an incident. What do they do?
So I think it depends on what your IP is. Obviously you can call us. The questions that we're going to ask are going to be regarding the protection of your intellectual property. How do you know it was accessed? And then what are the ramifications or the damage from that? But I guess as a broader point, if you have questions or you think something has happened, the FBI is a free resource, right? You should identify your secret sauce, for lack of a better explanation, for your intellectual property and protect it. But if you think something has happened or you have questions or problems, call us and ask us the questions. That's what I would encourage people to do, is reach out to us.
Kind of on that note, is there a difference from protecting IP from individuals versus companies or foreign governments?
So no, the things that you should do to protect your intellectual property are the things that you should do to protect your intellectual property. The only difference would be the resources that come to bear to actually steal the intellectual property, if they're from a nation state, would be much greater. A more sophisticated adversary is going to have more tools in the toolbox to steal intellectual property than probably someone sitting in a co-working space.
Yeah, but kind of going back to what you said, just the basic stuff you can do, like a VPN, or not having your crown jewels like in your shared drive on your desktop, could still go a long way to making a difference, whether it is an individual or a nation state.
Right, you're exactly right. And then, it's also this idea of, if you see somebody who's, targeting you through electronic means, you might just think about the totality of your security posture in your organization, and think about if you have a human capital issue as well as a cybersecurity issue. Some adversaries may have an interest in using both prongs in a sophisticated attack.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. So we would call that human-enabled cyber. Like you may have an unwitting employee that has access to your network that gets on free Wi-Fi at the airport, right? So that employee may come back to your workspace and get on your work Wi-Fi, and maybe they've carried something back from that free Wi-Fi spot that gets on your work network. So I think some employers have rules that you can only, what you can access and can't access as far as Wi-Fi and what you can do overseas when you bring the devices back.
Yeah. No, in that sense, that would be where it wasn't necessarily a target. It was just someone made a weird choice and got infected and brought it back.
Maybe. Or it could be good research by a foreign adversary saying, I know, employees of X travel. When they get on that free Wi-Fi, we'll be prepared to attack it.
Now, I would imagine people at home are probably thinking, like, okay, I get it, right, for, Apple or Google, but I'm a 20-person startup and I only make apps that do blank, right? But it's still some pretty special IP. What would you say to
I would say if you're building something of value, you should protect it. If it's of value, it doesn't have to be, I think one of the things that in the past we've done really moderately well is talk about protecting classified information. We haven't maybe done such a great job of going out and talking to startups and emerging tech about protecting their intellectual property. Anything that's of value and that can give an adversary or a competitor a competitive advantage, create jobs, build an economy, those are all things that people want. Whether it's, everyone wants to build an economy and jobs. So if it's of value and it's going to do those things, then I would protect it. That would be my advice.
Because it's much cheaper to steal IP than to make your own, right?
What's the ROI? What's the return on investment, right? Yeah, it's much cheaper.
Yeah, no, it's a legitimate concern. Okay, let's go back to some more questions. And again, just a reminder for anyone that's joined us recently. Actually, if you've joined us recently and you have no idea what's happening, I'll do another quick intro. So Zach Walker from the Defense Innovation Unit, Department of Defense organization that connects startups and companies to the Department of Defense's most challenging problems. Because of that, intellectual property and cybersecurity are a tremendous concern to us, which is why we're so honored to have with us Special Agent Jordan Lloyd and Special Agent Joe Murphy from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Austin office. And we're chatting with them about how to safeguard your IP and how to protect yourself against cyber threats from, was it insiders, competitors, and nation states, I think. But you can and should be part of the conversation. Please go on sli.do, that's sli.do, or download the Slido app and join with hashtag DIU for Defense Innovation Unit. And ask your questions. This is truly an Ask Me Anything. I can't promise I will read your question, but truly, anything that's been on your mind that you've ever wanted to ask FBI special agents, this is your chance. So we go back in. We have a question here. I think this could be good for you, Agent Lloyd. This is, how concerned should we be about our key employees' homes as an attack vector? Is that a common target for IP theft by outside actors?
Well, I mean, just generally speaking, home networks have it's a less defended environment. So, from an attacker perspective, that would be an opportunity, right? So, I think that's something that is not commonly discussed, but I think it's something that people should really care about. And I mean, we see computer intrusion in large corporate networks where adversary will compromise one device when it's on a particularly weak or soft network, and then from there they will drop something on a machine that becomes active when it reconnects to the primary network. So, like a primary business network. So we do see some computer intrusion activity that does leverage the more permissible networks that somebody may be connecting to in order to exploit and gain access into a more sensitive network.
But when you're at home, things like changing the default password on your router, or making sure, I mean, little things that you can do to lower your threat profile.
So updating firmware on your router, on your edge device, whatever it is, on your home network will have significant impact in mitigating. It'll significantly mitigate the risk against a lot of our adversaries, because a lot of these hardware devices that sit on the edge of your network, that often in places like your house, they are there for many years, and they may last 5 or 6 years. Whereas you may go through a couple laptops and a couple versions of Windows or Linux or what have you, different types of software, but the router will stay there, and a lot of times people don't update those, and they can absolutely be a vector for attack. So I think that's kind of one of the things that I always encourage people to do, is just think about the many devices on their network, and think about how they manage the security aspect of those. I mean, passwords are important, but also the firmware and just the overall architecture, how they choose to do business at their house. I mean, that's something that's, I think, extremely important that people consider.
Yeah, because Shodan is ready to show the world your open security, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of scanners out there. I mean, scanners are all over the internet. There are a lot of people who are looking at what's active on the internet, and what's behind the IP, what's behind the IP addresses from a hardware standpoint, and people are looking for opportunity, and a lot of that targeting of opportunistic targeting is driven more and more by automated systems. So as automation plays more of a role in exploitation across the internet, it just kind of enhances the importance of dealing with the basics on computer network security, like making yourself a hard target through complex passwords and updated firmware and things of that nature.
Yeah, well, thanks. Okay, so I've been sitting on this one for a while, and I'm very excited about it. Can you tell us a real story, maybe anonymized, of a company having their IP stolen and the way it was resolved through federal law enforcement?
Sure. I will tell a real story without making it animus. So there is a company that you guys may have heard of called DeSanto that does corn, that creates corn seeds and grows corn. And I think it was out in Iowa where they were planting like a hybrid corn seed. And a guy that managed the farms was driving down the road and he saw someone digging up corn seed in one of the fields. And so he stopped to see what they were doing. And the guy said he worked for one of the universities, and he kind of scurried off, got in his car and left. Well, the farm manager guy, wrote down the license plate number to the car, didn't think much about it. And about 6 months later, the FBI was doing outreach and ended up talking to this guy. And at the end of the FBI going out and talking to him, which we do pretty regularly, the guy said, "Hey, I don't know if this means anything, but this event happened, and I wrote down this license plate number," and they gave it to the FBI. Well, the long and the short of it is the FBI runs it down, and it was the Chinese government trying to steal the hybrid corn to manufacture it back in China. From that, we also learned that they were stealing rice in another state through the same techniques. So we prosecuted those gentlemen. I think we prosecuted 5 people, if I remember correctly, for the theft of the intellectual property. I think the problem for most people is by the time you realize you've lost your intellectual property, it's really hard to unwind that clock. So if you've lost your intellectual property and someone else is already exploiting it and using it, sometimes it's hard to wind that back, especially if you're an early stage entrepreneur. But we do where we can. If you have taken the steps to protect your intellectual property and we can meet what the legal guidelines are to actually prosecute someone, we're happy to do that.
Yeah.
But I think we would prefer to educate people in the front end to protect their intellectual property and not have to go through that.
That's a really interesting story because it's foreign nation coming in to take IP, but it wasn't like cloak and dagger. So obviously they just drove up and took it, right? I mean that's a very simple tactic. I think when we think about nation-state actors and foreign powers and the multi-million-dollar intelligence and surveillance apparatuses these countries have, we don't realize they just go take some seeds and leave. It's not like they were hacking into the mainframe, right?
Yeah. Well, it's what is of value to them may not, obviously that's of value to DeSanto. But people don't recognize that, anything of value can be taken. And it doesn't have to be through technological means. It doesn't have to be through a cyber hack or, through those type of stuff. It can simply be someone digging up seeds in a field.
Yeah, but there's a fine line because someone could legitimately be doing that, or it's probably not always a foreign government trying to steal IP.
Yeah.
What's the advice you would give to anyone that to steal from TSA? Right, when you see something, when should you say something? When does it cross that line? What does FBI want to know?
So I imagine it like this: if you imagine the FBI's job is putting together a puzzle. Right, so everybody's put together a puzzle. Imagine you have a very complicated 1,000-piece puzzle, and you have no box top to reference how the puzzle goes together. So you have all these pieces on a table, and we don't know if we have all the pieces or too many pieces. And we're constantly trying to put pieces of a puzzle together. And I may have pieces of a puzzle that go to Jordan's puzzle, or that go to a puzzle in Iowa, or Chicago, or San Francisco. But I'm constantly trying to put pieces of the puzzle together. And if you're that farm manager and you're driving down the street and you stop and you get that license plate number, that's a piece of a puzzle. And so we take that information and we're constantly trying to put stuff together. Now it could have been nothing, right? We could have looked into it and it could be nothing, and we take that piece of puzzle off of the table. And we continue trying to figure out what crimes are being committed with the pieces of the puzzle. So what I what I would suggest is, if you see something and you think it's odd or weird, call us. Let us know. It may be a piece of the puzzle. It may not be a piece of the puzzle, but we don't know until we actually take a look at it.
And what's your relationship with local law enforcement? Like, should that farmer have called the local constable in his county and called the FBI? Does that information flow up, or does it make sense to kind of scatter the information when you see it?
So that's a great question. The relationships generally with local law enforcement are really good. I don't know, I was a police officer before the FBI, so I don't know as a police officer what I would do with that information. Right? If a guy stole 2, 5, 10, whatever corn seeds, as a local police officer, I might write a report about it. I'm probably not going to fleet it up to the FBI because I'm probably not going to recognize the importance of that. So I think that, if it, call both or call us. If it's something that we feel like needs to be referred to a local jurisdiction, we can always do that too. But I think we would rather have more information than less information.
Yeah, and it's not asked, but I know at least someone out there is thinking, okay, yeah, I'm going to call the FBI, and then, like, you guys with machine guns are going to show up and take all my IP, and this is not going to end well. So, to anyone that may be thinking that,
we're not going to
right?
do that. We don't. Yeah, we don't. One, we don't have the resources. We don't have the legal necessity. We don't have, we just don't have.
Yeah, and I mean, really, our cases are successful just based upon the cooperation, right? Like, they're dependent on us working with our victims. We don't look to victimize people again. So we're going to work with our victims to ensure that whoever conducted the criminal act is held accountable. I mean, that's our ultimate focus, and we just can't do that without kind of a bidirectional partnership where we, both have the end goal in mind, right? We just want somebody to be held accountable for violating the laws here in America. And, just speaking to the point of the local law enforcement, we have great task forces all across the country with state and local law enforcement. And, they work in our office with us side by side, addressing a lot of these problems that the FBI is charged with dealing with, investigating. So, I'd just say that, our relationships are great, and, a lot of our success is dependent upon that cooperation with both the victims and with state and local law enforcement.
Makes sense. You're not the IRS. You're not paid to go out and do random audits of people, right?
Yeah. So just on the idea of audits and compliance, that's not the focus of the FBI. I mean, we're oriented towards identifying and locating the individuals who violate the law. And that's our goal. We're not looking to make sure somebody's PCI compliant or, questioning how they abide by HIPAA regulations. Our intent is just to identify and locate the adversaries who are violating the law and then hold them accountable for their actions, whether they're a nation-state entity or just, criminal on the internet.
Yeah, no, thanks for specifying that. I think that's really helpful. All right, let's go back to the questions here. I've been saving this one as well. You know which one this is. Can you discuss how software companies that use algorithms as their core technology can best protect their products and their intellectual property?
Yeah. So, so that's an interesting question, and it kind of falls into, I kind of break it down into two different pieces. So I'll speak to kind of the cyber risk piece, the computer intrusion risk piece. And then I think Jill, maybe Jill has something to offer on the people issues that can come up with this kind of a strategy. But so a lot of companies choose to outsource pieces of development and in their software, and regardless of the architecture of the software and what they're actually building, it's pretty much I try to just break it down to the fundamentals. Introducing outside parties to develop software just adds to the external risk exposure of a company. And so to the extent you're leveraging outside resources to do your business functions and develop your software, you're just continuing to add risk exposure to your organization and how it's structured. So it's all about risk acceptance. How much risk does a company need to accept to be successful? I totally understand that. We can work with companies kind of one-on-one if they see there's risk exposure and they're not really they're not fully aware, or they have concerns about a company that they're looking to do business with on the for a third-party service, or whatnot. We're happy to work with those cases one-on-one and see if there's something we can do to help you understand your risk a bit more. But some of that relates more to the people side of the issue. Whenever you're going to third parties for services in software development, do you have anything to offer on that?
Yeah, so I think obviously you should have good vetting practices and procedures for hiring employees. And in the U.S. government, we have this thing that we call continuous monitoring, right? So, you want to know, if your employees are under stress, because they're more likely to be able to be exploited, or they may be looking for other means to make money if something has happened. And a study, I think back in 2017, found that over 25% of employees, when they leave a company, actually take intellectual property with them. And so whether that's, again, intentional or unintentional, they generally find that employees email themselves intellectual property. So if you think about 25% of your workforce taking intellectual property with them when they leave, I think that's a pretty significant number in my mind. So I think, again, the idea of protecting or making sure you understand where your IP is and who has access to it, and being able to produce audit trails, whether it's on the cyber side or whether it's locked into a safe. Those are important policies and procedures for people to have to protect intellectual property.
Is that, in general, a crime? Like your last day of work, emailing yourself something that's proprietary and confidential while you're still an employee?
So it depends on the policies and the procedures that have been set up by the employer. So if I haven't identified it as intellectual property, and it would be hard for me to prosecute. It would certainly be unethical, and I would probably categorize it as illegal, but not prosecutable. I think it depends on probably a lot of different factors, non-disclosures, like what they've done to meet the legal guidelines to protect the intellectual property.
And then there's the idea of, what was the intent of the person?
Yeah. Intent plays a large role.
That's significant in our investigations. If they took the high frequency trading code, if they printed off the high frequency trading code and then took it to another, they became employed at another, high frequency trading company, and maybe the intent was there, and maybe present itself more as a criminal act as opposed to other scenarios.
Yeah, and there's a question actually about what the punishment is for stealing IP, and I know that's got to be a super broad question. But I guess if you could do maybe just a couple of examples of,
So I think, it depends on a lot of different factors. I would say that, generally speaking, 3 to 5 years is probably a good rule of thumb. But again, it just depends on the totality of the circumstances. Probably the value of the intellectual property, the damage done to the victim company, previous crimes the person's committed. It would hit a lot of different factors, but I think 3 to 5 years is probably a general rule of thumb.
That's fair. Let's see if anything new has come in here.
Hopefully that's not someone planning to steal.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think they're probably marking off their calendar now. Okay. Are certain regions more likely to experience diverse attack vectors? For example, if we have an office in DC, do we need to be extra mindful of security? Let me just expand that. What if we have an office in Moscow, or Beijing, or Shenzhen? How does that change things?
Yeah. So I'll just think about it kind of in the United States, and then we'll think about outside the United States a little bit. But inside the United States, it's having a presence introduces risk, regardless of where it is. I don't really see a difference in where a facility is physically located. I think, just having a physical presence introduces risk, and, it's different risk in the United States versus outside the United States. So just generally speaking, outside the United States, if you're a U.S. company, there are places where, you might be more susceptible to targeting than others. And that's some acceptance that some businesses have to take in order to do the business, to provide their service. And we understand that. So I think on those situations, we do like to talk to companies about those decisions, like moving abroad and working abroad, and how to do those things safely. We're interested in defending the corporate America whenever they're trying to make these decisions as global business.
You mentioned talking to companies. One question was, if you give talks or presentations on all of this to companies that ask for it, is that something that?
Yes, so we do. It's on an on-demand basis, and as resources are available, we're happy to do it. All of our field offices in the country have an outreach process, and you can call the local field office wherever you are, the local FBI office, and inquire about that, and they'll be glad to tell you, how you can make that request for outreach. But we also have things like InfraGard, which is a public-private partnership with the FBI and private industry, where you can, obtain some information about threats that may be out there, like the threats that Jill works and the threats that I work. And then we have a variety of other outreach, kind of conduits, if you will, where private industry and citizens in the United States can become active and learn more about these threats that their companies may face.
That makes sense. Oh, this is good. This is about the paradox of disclosure. The question is, how do I balance protecting IP with the need to share information during the early stage fundraising process? As an example, many VCs, and in many ways the U.S. government as well, we will not sign NDAs.
Yeah, so that is definitely a challenge for startups. I guess my basic advice would be, tell them what it does, not how it does it. I think with VCs and government contracts, I would urge people to check the venture capitalists that they're dealing with, do your homework, and if there are stand-up venture capitalists that other people that have done business with, then I would feel more comfort in sharing specifics with them. But the general rule I would suggest is, if you have a product or a thing, tell them what it does, not necessarily the ins and outs of how it does it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and just the track record, like Jill was talking about, is key. Honest and ethical companies who have a long history of working with startups to make them successful. That's key. Of course, there's a lot of great U.S. companies that perform this type of a service, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to work with U.S. companies right here in America to grow out their startup.
What if it's a U.S. venture capital firm, but there's a foreign limited partner that's half the money is from a nation that we may not consider to be best friends? Does that, and from your perspective, does that change the calculus of the risk for these companies, or should they just still try to guard their IP without regard?
So I do think there's a risk calculation that the company should do with that, and I think it depends on how they want to grow the company. For instance, if they contract with them, does that somehow prohibit them from doing work with the Department of Defense, right? Or they want to be in the national security space, or so it depends on what they want to do as a company. And how they should view that risk, and I would urge them to talk to other people that have done, business in the space that they're planning to do business, mentors, to make sure that they're aren't making unintentional mistakes or taking on risks that they're not seeing.
Yeah, that's good. There's always strings attached.
Yeah, I mean, what is the I would be cautious of someone that wants to invest in you that has no background in what you do. or that wants to, put 4 people on your board, or, like that. What are they getting from that investment, and does that actually make sense? And I think it's hard for startups, in particular, because they're living on a shoestring budget, and they're going from day to day, month to month, to pay rent, to try and get this dream off the ground. And so when someone offers you a lot of money, it might be hard to say no and wait a little bit longer for a different investment to come by. But I would urge doing, entrepreneurs are great at doing networking and doing research in social networks and, looking into people. I would just urge them to use that same stuff when someone offers them money as an investment, depending on what they want to do.
Yeah, it reminds me of some counterintelligence training I got when I was in the Army. It was very simple. If she's a 10 and you're a 6, it's a 7, right? It's just how it is, right? If it's too good to be true. Well, no, it would definitely be a 7. But no, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And it's just in life, really. And it's rarely
if someone comes
that's
along and tries to stuff money into your pockets, as one investor told me, or as one startup told me, and wants to put people on your board and really has no connection to what your business does,
that sounds awesome.
I would accept immediately.
Yeah. Actually, this goes to one of the questions that we've had up for a while, is the trends that you're seeing, both in counterintelligence as well as in cybersecurity, trends that are either nationally or maybe even more regionally in Texas. Things like bags of cash and maybe not that always, but just things that people may want to look out for that seem to be hot right now.
So I think that trends in tradecraft can be different across the spectrum. So I think that for us, the biggest thing that I would suggest people look for is the things that seem odd or make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. So I could give you examples, but I don't want to buttonhole people into what those examples would be, or categorize things in a way that make people look for one thing and then something else happen. So what I would suggest is, if something that you consider hinky happens, call us. Like if it's hinky for a reason. And just think through what is being offered and why it's being offered and what that return on that investment is.
Yeah, that's great advice. This is an easy one. So, will the websites and free resources named be available in a consolidated location? Anywhere on the FBI site?
If you go to FBI.gov, you can look under counterintelligence or cyber. There's tons of resources. I guess it's sometimes not probably super intuitive to find on a government website. National Counterintelligence and Security Center also has some really good videos, stuff on foreign travel. I think that's really helpful. I would say just poke around.
Yeah, there's lots of resources, and if all else fails, it sounds like you can just call the local office if you have specific questions.
Yeah, if you have specific questions, call the local office for sure.
And you had mentioned the overseas travel. One of the questions is, do you have suggestions for companies that have employees traveling overseas? I know my strategy was to just set my phone on fire when I got home. But that's a more expensive way to do it.
Yeah. On the computer intrusion risk side, depending on where you're traveling, you may experience an elevated level of risk. So, it's just about understanding, where you're going and what information you have with you, that you're taking with you, and how you're storing it. I think a lot of people tend to travel abroad and they just kind of take their phones and their devices with them. They don't really think about what's actually on them. I think it's just kind of a smart decision to consider the knowledge that's stored in your devices before you leave and go abroad, and just have a plan for how you're going to protect what you only take what you need to take with you, and then have a plan for safeguarding what's essential and what's confidential while you're abroad. If you're traveling with a laptop, don't only store what you need to have on it, and then have a plan for that laptop when you come back to ensure that you can have confidence in it if you ever if you want to use it in the future. And that's that could be a security calculation that companies can develop a process for understanding what risk what may have occurred on a laptop after it's gone abroad and come back, and think about they can do the same thing with cell phones and mobile devices, other types of mobile devices. This is a good practice for government and private industry to take on, just so it builds this culture of awareness and security mindset in the people who work in these companies whenever they're having to kind of go through these procedures for their travel.
Are people at risk because they work for a specific company, or are they at risk because they're an American traveling overseas, or is everyone at risk because of less security overseas? And really everyone, again, it goes back to, well, I make an app that does blank, and no one will care, no nation state cares about what I do, but is that really fair to say if you essentially have some nation state apparatuses that are just a completely different set of rules than we have in the US?
So I think on the computer intrusion side, talking to companies, I think a lot of companies undervalue their intellectual property and what they know in their business, and so when they go abroad, they tend to kind of go abroad with that mindset, like nobody would want the information that I have, and so it takes a bit of education for them to understand, what they're really exposing by living with that mindset. So, Jill, did you want to offer anything on the kind of like the people traveling abroad?
Yeah, I mean, I think people do undervalue what they have on their phone. I know I have a ton on my phone, right? So it's your contact list.
Yeah.
Do you access your financial data, your email? Like, there's a ton. There's just they're small computers. And I think on the human side, it really just depends on where you're going. The thing I would urge people about foreign travel is know the laws of the place you're going. The surveillance laws in the United States, I think we all know. But surveillance laws in the Middle East or in Asia are different. And what's legal there is probably not legal here. But people and governments can execute different levels of surveillance or monitoring of your devices in different countries. And I think if you're traveling abroad, you should make yourself aware of what those are.
That's great advice. So we have about 10 minutes left. We have 2 more questions. I'll put out another final pitch for anyone that has some questions for our special guest. Go to slido, sli.do, #DIU, and ask your most challenging questions. I'm impressed. I haven't actually had to delete any of these yet. Everyone's asking very strong questions, so I'm a little disappointed. Okay. This has been really great. Thank you. So jump on the last 2 questions and then see if anything else pops up. This is a technical one. Do having your employees use personal devices as opposed to company devices change your rights to IP protection, or maybe changes your exposure to what you have to protect?
So from a device risk exposure standpoint, I guess whenever you're taking on like a BYOD policy, you're really you're accepting the risk of the device and just kind of putting your faith in whatever secure container the data is being stored within, and that's an interesting approach. I know it's been fairly prevalent in industry, but I don't know. It's really, that one really relates to the risk acceptance and the cost effectiveness of doing business in that manner and kind of things of that nature. I don't know. Do you have anything to offer on the people side of that, the decision there?
Yeah, so, obviously at the FBI we have government devices that we use. I think it's a business decision, with acceptance of risk. I think on the IP side of the house, it's going to have to do with what business and what the business policies and procedures are around that intellectual property. So for instance, if you're, there's different rules at universities when you're working on projects that revolve around IP, and the university has very specific rules on, if you're an undergrad or a grad student, on how they deal with you working on stuff that is intellectual proprietary or maybe future patents. And I would imagine most businesses would do the same. So I think it'll be more about the business policies and procedures around the IP.
So just being on your phone, that doesn't. Oh, it's not IP because it's on my phone. It's still IP.
It's
you
still,
just
yeah.
have it on your phone. Yeah, no, that's great. Somewhat related, also a little bit technical. The question is baseline activities to be doing with the network as an IT manager. Mm-hmm. Perhaps above and beyond, I would imagine just whatever the standard security practices would be.
Yeah.
But if you have anything specific that people should be thinking of that maybe isn't in whatever normal best practices you see.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think about data storage in terms of risk and how it relates to access control a lot. And whenever we go to networks, we see a lot of it's kind of a static access control where people gain access to the network. They have access to all the data. It's not tiered risk, tiered access based upon need to know and things like that, which is kind of more common in the government. In industry, we see a lot of just kind of flat networks where the user base has general access to the large majority of the data without a lot of controls in place to audit and identify. Do these users really need access to this data? What do developers need, and then what is the production environment? Who needs access to the production environment? That kind of thing. It's something that we don't always see, and it gets exploited. That implicit trust across the network, especially when employees get terminated and things like that. That's also another thing where we see a lot of companies that don't necessarily have a stable process for rolling people out of the organization from a technical standpoint. So the access persists with the terminated employee, and then later they'll come back and do something nefarious in the network. And those are the types of things we care a lot about, and we investigate those. So if people see those types of events, or really anything else kind of suspicious in that computer intrusion realm, we're definitely interested in talking with businesses about those types of problems to see if it's something that we can help them with.
Yeah, it sounds like setting up a zero trust network is best practice.
100%. I mean, we don't. I don't personally. There's not a lot. There's hardware and software. I just I have a lot of problems trusting what's in the marketplace, just because the development cycle is so fast for a lot of the stuff in the market, and the testing really occurs after it's in the market and people are using it and identifying these issues. It's the people who manage networks, they have to realize that the days of building a high wall with real sophisticated security architecture on the edge and having trust and faith in that is just that's kind of not really something that is as viable today. When people are knocking holes in their firewall and setting up all these relationships with a variety of cloud services, and even users in networks are developing their own cloud relationships with services outside of the network, and that type of relationship often introduces a risk in the organization that maybe the managers don't fully recognize.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I think we can start to go to some kind of closing thoughts just to wrap up everything. If you have anything that you want to share with our likely international audience watching in on how best to protect their IP and their employees from cybersecurity threats.
Yeah, sure. So, thanks a lot for having us, by the way. It's very nice of you. I'll tell you, we really care about the companies doing business, the U.S. companies doing business in the United States and abroad, and we absolutely want to work with these companies to help defend and identify and locate the individuals who are conducting computer intrusions and targeting their information. We understand, just thinking about the software development, we understand the value of that intellectual property. and we want our businesses to be able to profit from their hard work, and be compensated for that properly, as opposed to, being victims of theft of intellectual property. I would just say a lot of the computer intrusions we see relate to they all go back to services that are forgotten, left on the internet, left internet accessible without a security process behind them to ensure their safety, or they involve they especially involve cloud services where cloud services are made available and security isn't considered whenever the cloud service is brought into the business environment. Or they like in the medical field, it's old hardware where the cost to upgrade is significant, and so as a business decision, hospitals and other medical service companies will make the decision not to make the upgrade. But thank you very much for the time today.
Thanks, Agent Lloyd. Agent Murphy?
So I'd say reach out to us. We are your neighbors. We are your friends. We live in your communities. Our kids go to your schools. If you think about intellectual property in the U.S., say approximately $400 billion is stolen annually. So if you're building something of value, there is likelihood for it to be stolen. Call us. We are part of your community. We want you to succeed. That's why we're doing this Ask Me Anything at Capital Factory here with Zach. That's why we do the outreach that we do. It's because we have an interest in you being successful. We want you to build jobs. We want you to build the economy. We want you to build your dreams.
I second that. They are actually pretty great people. And in a similar vein, it's the same with us. So the Department of Defense, it really is an unprecedented time in our history, both because of the IP being generated in the U.S. as well as the interest in that being stolen by all of the threats that they mentioned earlier in the webinar. And we all have a vested interest for startups and other companies to protect their IP, to be able to grow, to have as much success as possible. And if you choose to work with the Department of Defense or other government agencies, that's wonderful, right? We want to make it as easy as possible to do so. So we hope that this was a helpful opportunity. Certainly, we'd love to host the FBI again sometime. Huge thanks to guests for joining me today. It's really
the FBI's
wonderful
first
opportunity.
Ask Me Anything ever.
Hopefully not last. We'll
Hopefully
see.
not last.
Yeah, we'll go from there. Certainly the first for DIU as well.
So thanks for Capital Factory. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thanks to Capital Factory. Thanks to my special guest. And thank you to everyone that was tuning in today. And we'll see you around. Protect that IP.